The Owl House and Amphibia are both successful Disney shows about teenage girls who end up in another world with their smartphone. Both shows actually have a few similarities between them, including the types of characters that make up the main cast and even their overall story structure. However, and this may be an unpopular opinion, although I watched both shows all the way through, I ended up preferring Amphibia overall due to the differences in their storytelling. In fact, I almost dropped The Owl House after the first episode, whereas I found Amphibia more immediately compelling. There are a few reasons, but I'd like to highlight one important fundamental difference: a sense of urgency. Before I explain, let me get this out of the way. The Owl House is a 22-minute show, while Amphibia is presented as 22-minute episodes composed of two 11-minute segments. For the sake of this comparison, the first episode of Amphibia is the first half hour, or the first two 11-minute segments. Also, in case it isn't clear, I'm not saying that The Owl House is a bad show, just that even from the first episode, I liked Amphibia more. So, first episodes are important for creating a good first impression of a show. As such, they have a lot to do between introducing the setting and lead characters, planting the seeds of any early mysteries, and establishing possibilities for future episodes, all while still telling a complete story. There are exceptions, of course, but this is the baseline expectation. Since Amphibia and The Owl House are both serialized shows, they should also ideally introduce the conflict that will carry the rest of the series, or at the very least the first season, since that conflict can evolve over time. Now, one key part of the structure of a first episode, which you may have noticed at least subconsciously, is the normal to abnormal shift. At the start of most stories, we usually see the protagonist's normal, their everyday life, before the story thrusts them into the abnormal, their new life as shaped by new or extraordinary circumstances. For example, in Star Wars, no, we're not doing that, everyone does that. In Spider-Man, it's when Peter Parker, or Miles Morales if you're a Zoomer, gets bitten by a radioactive spider. In Squid Game, it's when Gi-hun is approached with an opportunity to erase his crippling debt, and in Five Nights at Freddy's, the movie, it's when Mike Schmidt takes the offer of working as a night guard at a rundown pizzeria. This abnormal shift often drives the main conflict and segues into introducing stakes that the audience can latch onto. While not all stories do this, of course, it's a tried and true storytelling method, and in the case of Amphibia and The Owl House, the difference is in the execution.
Welcome to The Owl House.
In its first episode, A Lying Witch and a Warden, The Owl House establishes that in Luz Noceda's normal, she's a bit too weird for normal society, and her mother Camilla agrees to have her sent to a summer camp that will make her, well, normal. While waiting for the bus, however, she's thrust into the abnormal when she comes across a mysterious door and ends up in the Boiling Isles, an alternate world where magic and demons are real. By the end of the episode, she decides to stay in the Boiling Isles of her own volition so that she can learn to become a witch. Personally, while I understood this episode's intent, I didn't find it compelling enough for an introduction. For one thing, it spends a lot of time hammering in the message that weird is awesome, even from the very beginning with Reality Check Camp as the name of the summer camp. It's a fine message, but at some point I couldn't help thinking, we get it. It also does accomplish a lot of what a first episode ideally should, like setting up a mystery for how Ida got a bounty that puts every One Piece character to shame, but spends so much time on its core message that it overlooks some details that I would personally care about, like how Luz has cell phone reception between dimensions, or how Ida can operate her business out in the open despite being a wanted criminal. The biggest issue for me, however, is how it's clear that Luz can go back home whenever she pleases and actively chooses not to, which removes a lot of potential tension. On top of that, peering a bit into the future, it's not until the end of season 1 that the show actually establishes any stakes by trapping Luz in the Boiling Isles, forcing her to find a way back home. As for Amphibia, we don't see much of Anne Boon Choi's normal, but we do know that she had a relatively normal life with her friends Sasha and Marcy. When she opens a mysterious music box that her friends pressured her into stealing, she enters the world of Amphibia, a frog-themed alternate world, as well as her abnormal. Unlike Luz, however, Anne is trapped against her will, creating a sense of urgency that the Owl House lacks with her goal of finding her friends and returning home. However, Anne can't leave the valley where the town of Wartwood resides for 2 whole months, giving us a good in-universe explanation to explore the characters and their relationships before she starts physically moving toward her goal in season 2. At the end of the episode, however, we still get some solid stakes with the introduction of Captain Grime, a toad who has imprisoned Sasha and acts as the main antagonist for the first season. There's something else I want to mention about the way Amphibia introduces its core elements, but it involves a brief explanation of a concept from the book Manga in Theory and Practice by Hirohiko Araki, the mangaka behind JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. As an aside, this book actually inspired this video as it helped me process my feelings about these two shows. In the book, Araki discusses his views of storytelling through positive and negative arcs, suggesting that the audience will feel more invested if the protagonist always moves in an upward trajectory. No matter what obstacles the protagonist faces, they always get closer to their goal in some way. way. He gives only 2 exceptions: if the creator purposefully attempts a negative arc, citing The Godfather Part 2 and zombie fiction, or if the protagonist starts out in a negative because they're already imprisoned, in which case escaping ends the story in a positive. Araki demonstrates this with his own work through Stardust Crusaders, which begins with Jotaro already in jail, creating an air of mystery over how and why he ended up there. Although we get an explanation fairly quickly, this segues into the formal introduction of stands, and soon after, the conflict between Dio and the Joestar bloodline, as well as a sense of urgency when the Joestars must travel to Egypt with their allies to defeat Dio within 50 days. The reason I explain this concept is that although I've gone over Anne's normal to abnormal shift, we don't see that until the second segment, Best Franz. The first segment, Anne or Beast, on the other hand, achieves the same effect that Araki had with Stardust Crusaders by depicting the events from Sprig's POV and thus his normal to abnormal shift. In this case, he starts off with a reputation as a screw-up and, in an effort to prove that he isn't, finds himself in the abnormal when he meets Anne at the same time that the audience does. Since we see Sprig's POV first, a human appearing in a world of frogs raises certain questions like who she is and how she got there. We learn the answer to both by the end of the episode, but on top of the threat of Captain Grime, we now have questions of our own about the nature of the music box, which fuels much of the first 2 seasons, and of course the sense of urgency over Anne's goal. So that's the video. No shade to anyone who swears by the Owl House, but since first impressions are important, I wanted to highlight why I thought Amphibia created a better one. But wait, there's one burning question you might have by this point. If I almost dropped the Owl House after 1 episode, why did I end up watching it all the way through?
Try to catch me when I'm covered in grease. I'm a squirmy little fella.
Until we meet again.